They said to me the leader had been brought to Jakarta and was under house arrest in a little bungalow. And the next day they were going to take him out and shoot him in the town square.
If there was a new prime minister being sworn in and the king wanted to actually say, no, I don't like this person, I'm not going to let them, would they be able to do that?
I know Jeremy Corbyn well and sat next to him a lot as a close colleague. How do we build the people up from the bottom up to have a share according to their own capacities and interests, really?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Man Overboard podcast. We've had some amazing guests throughout our time doing this, and today we're joined by John Battle, who has been or was a Leeds MP for a number of years. I think it was just over 2 decades, as well as holding many other roles within the government and doing lots of fantastic community work. Welcome, John. How's it going?
It's going okay so far, yeah.
Yeah, lovely stuff. So I wanted to kind of jump into things with a bit of an open-ended question in some ways. The first question I want to ask is, what originally motivated you to get into politics? What was the first thing that kind of spurred you down that path?
Wow, I never set out to be a politician. You know, I don't come from a family of politicians. I grew up in a place called Batley Car in Dewsbury, where I have to tell you, I thought Leeds was the big smoke. You know, for years I thought the Queen lived here until my auntie went out with someone in back-to-back in the Bayswaters in Hare Hills, and then I realised it was a normal city, you know. So I didn't start by wanting to be a politician. My family were from Ireland originally, and the roots were Irish, you know, peasants from County Mayo, really, and came over as navvies, then worked in the mines, and my father was an electrician, but they were political. So my dad would argue about politics, and my mum would as well. And Labour politics, no, they weren't members of the party. My father wasn't a trade union organiser as such, and paid to do a job as a trade union organiser. It was into the Labour movement, if you like. So I had a bit of a history in the family there. I suppose what took me towards it was housing conditions in Leeds, really.
Okay.
And I think it was thinking, what on earth is going on when people living in houses without proper sanitation and landlords not looking after people? It's still going on now.
Yeah.
And I think it was that, really. And so I went into it by accident. I mean, I had a strange career because I was in a Catholic family, and I went to train to be a Catholic priest in Liverpool.
Oh, okay.
And then I worked in a community called Corbyn in Liverpool as part of that training. And that was one of the biggest council estates in the country, really. And that was lively, I'll tell you. And I used to have to work there and then go back to what was called a seminary and reflect and, you know, study religion, if you like, the Bible, scripture, what we call pastoral studies. Others that went to train were asked questions like, why do you want to be a Catholic priest? And one lad, I was one of the youngest, actually. It was a small class of people that said, oh, well, I want to work with old people, you know, and I visit the elderly. Another person said, I want to work with children and teach kids religion. Another said, visit people in hospital. And I said, I want to do something about housing. So they said, well, go to Kirby. And I remember being told to go to Kirby, and they said, well, we lived in. So it's, well, go to Kirby on Tuesday and come back on Thursday. And I said, oh, where do I stop? He said, well, if the people love you, they'll put you up. So I was just sent out on my own to stay in Kirby overnight, the wildest council estate in the country.
Thrown to the wild.
Exactly. Thrown into it. And I knocked on the door of a church there and said, I'm training at the college up the road. I haven't got any idea. You don't know who I am, but can I sleep on your floor? And the guy that was there, the priest that was there, said, oh, yeah, all hands to the deck, he said. And I was involved in working with the community groups in Kirby. And I worked with the mums and tots groups to get them organised. We built the children's playground. And then we got the tenants group moving to challenge the council onto why they were doing repairs to council housing. So that germ, if you like, and I was always known housing. But I then did a strange thing. I think it was hard work and, you know, going backwards and forwards with the people and lots of pressure. And I was only 18, 19, 20, 21. And then I decided, strangely, there was this monk that had written a book about peace and quiet. And so I thought, oh, that's it now. I've had enough of the action. I'm going to go and be a silent monk.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. So I set off to go to be a silent monk. I left that college and said, I don't think I'm made to be a priest in a parish, you know, working with the people. I think I should live in silence and worship God. So I go to the monastery, and after about half an hour, the monks were wily old birds that had been there for years, you know, God, Battle can't keep his mouth shut, not much point in being a silent monk, is there? So they more or less told me to go straight away. Like, it's not my vocation, was it? So then I'd come out and I'd had that training, and I thought, And I had a what they called a director, a person, like a mentor, you'd call it now. He said, well, if you don't want to do this, try that. But he died when I came out. And so I felt a bit lost, really. So I came back to Leeds. And the first thing I did was got involved in an housing campaign because I was trying to find a place, with others. I was literally a board near Woodhouse Moor looking for a flat or a house, and I met up with some lads there, and we shared together and got a house set up, shared it. But then the neighbourhood we were in was called Well Close Mount. Okay. The conditions of the families there were terrible. So the bug of Kirby came back to me. That right, we'll organise, we'll take on the council. And at that time then I applied as what they call a late student to go to university. Okay. So I went to university and carried on the housing campaigns.
Okay, cool.
And then after that, I think I'd started arguing with the council, and the Labour Party came along and said, what he's making a lot of noise about housing and stuff. So I said, yes, I am. So they invited me to go. I joined the Labour Party as just an ordinary person, but wasn't anybody big in it at all. So they asked me to go to this meeting of the whole of the Leeds Labour Party down in town at the Engineering Union Workers headquarters. So I remember going down on a Wednesday night, I think it was, to this meeting in a big hall. There were about 250 people there, and it was like a school, the platform in a hall, a school hall, where and there were a top table there, and I always remember it were men with pork pie hats on, and having a pipe and the rest of it, and there was a chairman and the secretary and the treasurer, and a hall full mainly of men. Oh. And they'd ask, we've got this lad, John Battle, who's been making a lot of noise about housing and the conditions of housing in Leeds. So we thought I'd invite him to come and talk to us about campaigning on housing. And then somebody, this is at 7:30. And the meetings always go from 7:30 till 9:30. So one fella puts his hand up, says, "We've never heard of John Battle." He said, I'm younger by about 40 years from everybody else in the room, And he said, on any road, he said, until he starts telling us what's what, he can get his backside on a chair down here and listen to us for 20 years, then he might know something. So I move he doesn't speak to us. And they have a discussion for an hour on whether I should be allowed to address the
So not even to do with you speak, it's to do if you can actually speak.
No, the question was, should he be allowed to speak because he wasn't a delegate? That's
right.
Yeah, so the first hour was doing the minutes of the last meeting, and then it got to 8:30, and then they had a discussion of whether I should speak. And I got on about 9:25, so about 3 minutes to talk about housing. I thought, wow, my God, I said, if the future's you lot here for changing our city, as soon as this pub closes, the revolution starts, really, We're not on the same page here. Yeah. And I said, if you think this is going to be the way forward, no way. And then others thought, well, he might have something to say. And I started building up the conversations. And then they asked me to stand for a councillor, and I was very young. And I said, no.
How old were you then when that was happening?
21, 22.
Oh, wow, yeah, very young.
They said to me, well, I said, I'll not be a councillor, but I'll show you how to organise with the people. And I became an agent, as they call it, voluntary. I said, I will help somebody else become. And a great friend of mine who served Hunslet for many years, it's called John Gunnell was first. He died, but then Jeff Driver, they became the councillors down in Hunslet and Belle-Isle. Then there was, as it were, another seat to fight for. And said, John, you must stand. And I was like, I'm too young.
I was going to say, at this point, were you thinking, oh, well, maybe I'm not kind of cut out to be a councillor. I'll just help someone else. I have things I'm passionate about.
I was a good campaigner. I knew how to campaign. I could go up and down, chat to the people. I remember once as a campaigner on Belle-Isle Road, and, you have to knock on doors, talk to people, you have to organise. And I remember there were the flats that have got a stair up the middle, and then flats on the top. They used to call them the houses for people with TB because you could open the windows at the top. And they needed windows.
Oh, I see.
Right. They were built for fresh air houses. And this lad sticks his head out of a fresh air. What the FA do to come round here asking, going vote Labour? He says, yeah, bloody useless, the lot of you. And I said, well, what's your problem? And he says, I'll tell you what my problem is. I have his bloody guitar. I can't bloody tune it. Well, the one thing I can do is that I can tune a guitar. So I was straight up the middle of the steps tuned his guitar, and then he was out campaigning with me for the rest of the campaign. Nice. So it's how to work with people, is the key, isn't it? But I never thought that I would be the councillor, and then I stood to get elected. Amazingly, the people elected me. And I think, looking back over time, and perhaps a bit I think it was one of the best times. 'Cause it was like the Kirby experience, working close to the ground, which I have to say I've got back to a bit now since I've retired.
Yeah.
And it's working to get the people themselves to say we can do it for ourselves if they get together. And that's what I love best about politics. And that's where the action is really. So I had about 10 years of that before somebody then said to me, will you stand for Parliament? And I thought, God, that's not me, is it? And I actually said yes to stand. And I thought, well, I actually stood in Northwest Leeds where they told me I had no chance, and I came last. But that was to be expected. It was the year of a new group called the SDP that split from the Labour Party. And so it was all over the place.
Right, yeah.
And I remember it was from Headingley to Otley, and I lived at the Burley end of Otley then. Me and Mary lived there. And I was a councillor, you know, and so I put my name up, and it was battle for our future. And I remember my dad came over because he'd moved over towards Wigan then, and he came over and I took him on a drive up to Otley, and there were posters on the trees as you went up the Otley Road to Otley, because Otley was pounded. And I'm looking at vote battle for our future. And then my dad said, when we got to look, Dad, you know, like, this is my campaign. I thought he'd be really proud of me, you know, in the Labour movement and all the rest of it. And I got to Otley to have a cup of tea, and they said, you do realise, lad, don't you, that trees don't vote? And I came last.
You're talking to what wrong people here.
Exactly.
Although I have to admit, battle for our future, that's a great slogan. Yeah, that is good, that.
It's gifted with a name, but the name's a spelling mistake because we come from County Mayo. And if I found out years later, the name was Battle, E-L, not Battle.
Right, okay.
When the great-great-granddad came over from County Mayo to Batley in Dewsbury, and he got married, he couldn't read and write. So the fella wrote down, you know, whatever you call it, the registrar wrote down Battle and put it down as B-A-T-T-L. But then some went back to Mayo. So in the gravestones in County Mayo, you'll see both Battle and Battle.
So both have carried on from that point. Yeah, both have
carried on, and there are different branches of the family, but Battle's quite a rare name, really.
Yeah, it is a good one. So at that point when you came last in the election, of course, you said there were some outside factors that were involved in that. But what happened then? So was running again just a given, or did you have to kind of fight for that?
No, after that, we moved across to here then.
Right, yeah, to West.
And if you remember, there was an MP here called Michael Meadowcroft. He's still alive, and he was, to be fair to the man, he was a good local campaigning politician, and he was Liberal, and the Labour Party wanted the seat, and they wanted to challenge him, but they didn't think they'd beat him.
Yeah.
And so they said, well, John Batley makes a lot of noise, and if he flies the flag, that'll be good, you know. So, and I was told of no chance of winning. It was in 1987 when it was Mrs. Thatcher and the tide was against Labour. What was really funny was, at that time, the Labour Party was going through these traumas of making sure everybody looked right, you know what I mean? And they had kind of image making, and they had kind of consultants in to make you look right for the candidate, you know, to look like, you know, the film The Candidate.
Yeah.
So they asked me to go to Manchester, but by this time I'd managed to also get myself a job. So I was a councillor at a job, and I was working late. So I go over to Manchester. I probably got the same jumper on. And I turned up, and I was late, and they said, I know at that time my hair was longer, but the same glasses and jumper. They said, John Batley, it's okay that you've turned up because you've missed the television training, but then you're not the person for the television, so you can do the radio training. So I thought, why? He said, well, you don't look right for the television, do you? Really?
You got a face for radio.
Exactly. You got a face for it. That's it. You look a lot better on the radio. That was what my daughter said at one point, actually. So I thought, damn it. And I thought, what a cheek.
Yeah.
Anyway, I came away thinking I failed the training. They sent me notes, and thank you very much for training. And Neil Kinnett was the leader at that time. And again, to claim the bragging rights. And at that time, where I was a councillor, a doctor refused to go and visit a family on the grounds that the people of Belle Isle were wild and it wasn't safe to go there.
Wow.
And I thought, I'm pushing a pram up there with our kids in. What, you know, exactly. There is nowhere.
That's inhumane, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I really went for this doctor. Put out a press release, not only the front page of the Evening Post, not only on the Look North, but it became the second item on the ITN news.
Wow.
So, you know, this doctor refused, and I wanted them struck off. If they can't do the job, strike them off, they should visit. And it was before the crisis in the health service, you know. And I remember it was, so I'm on national telly giving the statement out about if we pay our, you know, to our tax to the National Health Service, people need it, and we're not having this in our area now, start championing in our area. And I remember I got a call from Kinnett's office saying, we heard you didn't do very well at the television interviews, but Neil Kinnock was trying to get on the news last night and couldn't because you'd pushed him aside."
Who's got the face for telly now?
I've got the face for telly, but I think it's what I learned from that. And I've always said it's not the face for the telly; it's the principles and the campaigning policies. It's the arguments, the change that the people need. That's the key to politics. And so they asked me to stand in West Leeds, and I have to say, I got the shock of my life in 1987 when I went to the town hall, and I'm sat there, or stood there rather, and you watch the votes pile up in piles on the tables.
Be ballot cards back then, wouldn't it? Yeah.
And suddenly I turned to Mary, who was with me, with 3 kids at the time, and I see my pile getting bigger than Michael Meadowcross, and I turned to Mary and said, "My God, my piles are getting bigger." And she looked at us. I said, "I could win this. What do I do next?" And Mary turned around to me and said, "I think you're going to London, you fool."
Yeah, I think you better get back in.
And the rest is history. And wonderfully, the people of Westleys voted me in with the biggest swing that year, and I was very proud of that. But then to keep in touch with the people of Westleys, and they elected me a number of other times for another 23 years or so.
Yeah, that's a massive stint, and it proves you were definitely doing at least some things right. If you've been re-elected that many times.
I met him the other day. Tragically, he died just a week ago, and his funeral will be soon. And his wife died early, and I was at his funeral. He said, "Oh, John Battle," he said, "I've not seen him for a while. A good friend and a good man." And he said, "Dennis and I wore out my shoes campaigning for you to get you elected." So I said to him, you did. I said, "You did get me so much to tell you. Thanks very much for getting me elected, and everything I did wrong is on you now."
I know once
you've admitted it now. Yeah, that's it.
It's your fault.
That's it.
You had to put me there.
You voted me in. I know once you'd kind of made it a little bit higher in the government and held your seat for a while as well, you also had some other roles. I think you were the Minister for Foreign Affairs at one point and Commonwealth Affairs. Yeah. What differed in that role? Like I've not looked into politics enough to know what the difference between that role and being a general MP is. Yeah,
a general MP, you'd have to cover a lot of topics, but your idea would be a bit like, in Armley Mills there's a shuttle. Mm-hmm. And you had to be sharp at both ends. So I didn't live in London, I lived here.
Yeah.
And so what you had to do is listen to the people on a weekend. I used to come home on the very late train on a Thursday night and get in about 2 a.m. Then on Friday, I'd probably visit a school, maybe visit a business or a factory. And then perhaps have meetings in the evening on Friday. Saturday, I did what they called advice surgeries in the libraries in every one of the areas in Armley, Kirksville, Wortley, and Farnley, Bramley. And people would come with their problems all day. I used to have it fixed from 9 o'clock till 2 because I always used to try and make sure that at 2 I could leave and go watch Leeds United.
Hey.
But then Sky came and matches changed to Sundays and people realised they want a match on. So at 2 o'clock, there was a massive queue. But the idea was you listen to the people and from that you try to distill from what they told you what are the laws and budgets, because that's all it's about, that have been made in London doing for their lives. Are the laws and budgets right? And if not, challenge them at the other end. So it's quite simple in a way. So listen at this end and go down there and challenge the laws and budgets. And that's the role of an MP. And then some might be invited, if you form a government, or indeed if you're opposition, to do the overall policy. And you might then be given a role to do one area of policy. So when I went into Parliament, my big thing was the money. And it was people not having enough money. No. So living wages, social security issues, and bad housing was probably the big things that I was on all the time. I was known as a bit of an housing nerd because I knew a lot about housing policy. So I could keep people up all night talking about housing and they hated it. I remember Dennis Skinner. Do you remember the name?
Yes, I do actually. I've seen some videos of him.
Dennis is good. I remember one night it was called, at that time what would happen is if there was a law going through, you could talk it out by talking so long and saying you haven't had enough time to consider it. But it meant staying up all night to talk it through. And I remember the first time it was on housing and I got up and I was... Dennis would kind of, he was very bright man and he'd know a bit. He knew how to play the games of the House of Commons and he would help people. So, you'd start off speaking and Dennis would say, "Can I just ask you a question a minute to lead you on a bit, So I stood up to start speaking about housing, and a Conservative interrupted me. So, this is ridiculous. Really, these people should pay more rent, and they get their rent paid from Social Security. So I sort of, do you know how housing benefit works? Because I get the impression you don't. So I'm going to explain it to you in detail. And at that point, Dennis, who was in the chamber, said, "Oh my God!" He says, "We've got somebody who knows what he's talking about. We're going to be here all night. I'm off to bed." And Dennis walked out, left me there all night.
Oh, he actually walked out?
Yeah, left me there with the other. But and so it was housing was the thing, and poverty really in our neighbourhoods. The challenges of our neighbourhoods. And then I was the shadow housing minister under the great John Smith for a while, and did bits of jobs there. And then when it came to Tony Blair. It was an interesting moment when the leader, I wasn't in his team choosing him as the leader of the Labour Party. I went for a woman called Margaret Beckett.
Okay, so you kind of went against him in some way.
Yeah, and what was worse was I was with John Smith the night in a meal the night before, a party meal the night before he died. And I knew him really well, John, and so I'd heard he'd died. I went into the House of Commons about 9 o'clock after it'd been on the radio. He died at 8:15. And who walked straight into the cloakroom, as we call it, the entrance, but Tony Blair. And he'd said to me, "Hello, John, you'll be on my team, won't you?" Slaps me on the back. And I said, "Sorry, Tony, I've just given my commitment to campaign against you for Margaret Beckett." And I thought, there goes my career today. He's going to win. But to be fair to the man, he didn't hold grudges in the same way. But anyway, what happened was... the campaign went on. I campaigned for Margaret. Tony Blair won. And then he dishes out the jobs. And so you're told, stand by your phone and see if he rings you up. And literally the leader chooses what you do. You could be what's called the shadow minister. You're not in government, but you have to monitor what the government do on a subject. So I thought, if he wins, he'll still ask me to be housing. So I'm waiting around and I hear that another colleague is down in the bar celebrating the fact that he's been made the shadow housing minister.
And you were thinking,
yeah, and I'm thinking, okay.
So have you now?
So and then the other jobs have been announced, and a friend of mine in the Wits said, "John, the other fellow said, and he giving you a job at all?" He said, "I think you better go back to your room and stand by your phone." He says, "He's bound to give you something." So I'm in my room about 10:30 at night. And, "Hello, John, it's Tony here, Tony Blair here." So, okay, yeah, I said, John, housing. I said, "Yes." I said, "Housing, yeah." I said, "Am I doing housing then, Tony?" He said, "No, I've decided to move you." So I said, "Aren't you happy with what I was doing in housing, Tony? Didn't you think I was doing you were doing a brilliant job in housing? So why are you moving me?" And he said, "Well, I've got another job for you." And I said, "Is it the last job you're offering?" Because somebody's told. And he said to me, "I want to offer you science and technology." Okay. And I said, "But I don't know much about science and technology, really." And he said, "John, I don't think you understand what this conversation's like." He says, "I'm the leader. I'm offering you a job. Either you want a job or you don't want a job. Because other people do."
Yeah, that's it.
It's a queue.
Yeah.
And I said to him, I said, "Okay, if you're seriously asking me to do science and technology and you have given thought to it, think I can do it, I'm going to say yes. And I'm not going to do it and sort of spit back and say I should be doing housing. I'll do it properly and to the best of my ability. Thanks very much." And it was the best thing that happened to me. And it turned me into a politician, because otherwise I'd have been a housing specialist, like Dennis Skinner said, forever. Do you know what I mean?
You'd have just known that.
I then started to study the policies on science and technology. I visited Leeds University. I visited science departments. I went to see what physics was about. I visited science labs, biology labs, to do all the research laboratories. I loved it, and I learned so much. And now I'm massively enthusiastic about science and engineering.
So he must have had an inkling in there that you might have been the right man for it.
What he did was he turned me into a politician, where you've got to be free to move around,
Right, I see.
So then I did that, and then when I went into government, I did science and technology as well as energy as well, and I've done that. And then suddenly, I remember we were in government. I did my best. I really enjoyed it. And after 2 years of being in the Department of Trade and Industry, I'm at home, and I get a phone call from Tony Blair. In 2000, and I think it was 1999, it was 2 or 3 years. And then he said, "John," he said, "I've decided to change you. And I've decided that I want you to go to the Foreign Office." And there was another MP for Leeds called Derek Thatcher, who was a foreign minister, and he died. and he was my senior, if you like. You know, he said, and I want you to take over from Derek Thatcher in the Foreign Office. I said, Tony, I've hardly been abroad. I know where Ireland is, you know, but I've not travelled very much. And Johnny said, Foreign Office is for you this time. You know, so I then.
What was that experience like for you in terms of if there was someone that was your senior and then you kind of picked up on that role? Was that quite a big honour or quite a big shout from Tony Blair?
It was a big shout, yeah. So then I put the phone down, and then the Foreign Office rang me. This is minutes after, saying, "Oh, is that John Battle? You're the new Minister of the Foreign Office." He said, "Yeah. Well, there's an airline ticket in the morning. This is a Friday night. In the morning, you have to fly to Heathrow. The civil servants will meet you, and you've been flown out to Jakarta to try and sort out the war in East Timor. There'll be staff and notes on the plane." Phone went down. Oh, Jakarta. Well, where the heck's Jakarta? You know? Yeah, exactly. Indonesia. And there was, and I knew a little bit about the conflict there because East Timor was a little island right at the far end of Bali and places. And they were trying to separate from the rest of Indonesia, and there were people being murdered, and the city of Dili was being burnt down. So I knew there was. So anyway, I had to go out to Dili, and I remember my first experience as a foreign minister, because you don't really have training in it. You're a politician to work with it. So I've got a file this thick that I'm reading on the plane. I'm really nervous. I get to Jakarta. The Foreign Office civil service meet me there. The ambassador meets me there. And they take me to a hotel, top of a hotel where there's a television studio like this, and interview me, and all over the national news here. And now Minister John Battle is here because he has to invite the UN to come in to form a peace. And what I didn't know was the screen was split. And the other screen was Dili, which is in East Timor. And they're showing it being on fire. And I'm stood on top of this thing. So you have a screen of me here and this fire. And there were people in Bramley ringing Mary thinking, they've sent him out into a fire zone. He's going to get I was 1,000 miles away. Yeah. But what had happened was the man that was leading the rebels was called Shenana Guzmao. And Derek Thatcher had mentioned him to me. Wait for it, little catch. He was training to be a Catholic priest, and he left and became a politician, leader of the people. And Derek had told me that because Derek wasn't a Christian, but he knew the story. And so they said to me the leader had been brought to Jakarta and was under house arrest in a little bungalow. And the next day they were going to take him out and shoot him in the town square in Dili. So the ambassador said we should go visit him. So we went to visit him in the Land Rover at the British government, the flag on. We got to the house and there was army outside guarding his house. We go into a courtyard. It's a little modest bungalow. I always think it's like those bungalows up, if you go up the side of Gotts Park, up the road there, some bungalows there. It was like one of those. And we went in and he could speak perfect English. He'd been trained in Australia. And said, and it was a sad thing. He said, well, I did what I could, and I was trying to lead the revolution to overthrow the government because they were torturing people and saying we had no jobs and we were poor. We needed our land back. But they're going to kill me tomorrow. And then the ambassador turned around and said, there's a tradition in Britain that if we go for a cup of tea in someone's house, you have to invite them back to yours immediately. I said, you what? I said, yeah. I said, so we're getting the Land Rover together and we're taking back to the embassy. So we did. Oh. We got to the gate and said, the ambassador, it's the minister and his colleague, he has to take them back to tea. Is that okay? And he's under house arrest. So we drove out with him, take him to the ambassador's residence, which is behind a gated wall, and getting, so what do we do now? And we'll have to put him up, don't we? And he's not, but they're not going to take him away and hang him. So anyway, they got a bed downstairs as well, and forgot about it. And after all the carry on, go to sleep. I'm woken up at 7 a.m. saying, President Abibi was his name, has rung up and said he wants to know what's going on and why has the embassy taken his key enemy hostage and given him refuge, It said, so he wants us as the British to be at his palace explaining ourselves by 9 o'clock. Oh. So I come out the embassy to face a water cannon with "Made in Britain" printed on it, faced at me. Good morning. And so you go past, and I got to the place, and so I've now to meet this person who's the president of Indonesia. He's about 5 foot, with the little hat on that the Indonesians wear, and he's got this big chair. I will be sat about where you were, a little bit of a distance away. And he said, Battle, never heard of you. Is it your real name? He said, Violent Enough, never heard of you. in perfect English, Oh, he said, remind me what little island of Western Europe you come from.
Oh,
There are 13,000 islands in my archipelago and 17,000 low tide. How many people live on your little island? I think there are more men in my standing army than in your little island. And have you come to invade me, Minister Battle? And I kind of think, oh my God, where do I go from here? Yeah. And I said to him, do you know what I said? Until the night before last, I was doing gas and electric bills. and now I've been asked to be a diplomat, but I'm from Yorkshire and I've not travelled very much, and I've not many diplomatic skills because we're a bit of an outspoken people in Yorkshire. We just like to say it as it comes, And I said, so I'm not really an ambassador type or a foreign minister type, but I'm a practical man. And I said, but then I thought you were a practical. Have I got you wrong? Would you be President Abibi that worked with Sir Frank Whittle inventing the jet engine? Because my dad told me you were, and I just remembered your name, and I don't know if you're the same man, because would it be you? And his face lit up.
Yeah.
And it's me. And he gave me 40 minutes on the internal workings of a jet engine. I didn't understand a word. I just made noises. And then he just said, let's go for a drink with my foreign minister. I'm sure we'll sort this out and can invite the UN in.
Wow.
Oh, there you go. Fantastic.
What did I learn from that? It wasn't all the papers about the policy, but finding what makes the other person's heart beat, what turned him on. And I said, you're not really a president, like I'm not really a minister. What makes your heart beat is engineering, isn't it? And that's where it comes from. And touching that then meant we could invite the UN in. It was a peacekeeping mission. Only one person died in that peacekeeping mission, and they stepped on a landmine. Oh. There's still challenges now because the country's poor, but it stopped the war. Mm-hmm. It held up the war, and they let people cross the border. But it was just knowing the person is more important than knowing the facts and the rigmarole and the history. You have to know a bit of that, but it's
communicating on like a core level, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Get to the core of the person and see where you go. Yeah,
definitely.
And so that was my Foreign Office experience, really. And it was the Foreign Office had to travel a lot because the countries I was responsible for were China, Australia, or Japan, all that southeast.
All the furthest away.
Yeah. And also Latin America. So I argued in the Foreign Office that if you've got Australia here and Latin America here, and there's the Pacific Islands, that lovely Polynesia, and, Kiribati, right? And I would have my office there, please, because it's pointless coming back.
It's halfway either way then. Yeah.
I bet that was crazy for you, having not really travelled outside of the UK much, to then, obviously, you said that experience was mental. Was there any other experiences you had whilst in the Foreign Office that you couldn't have imagined ever going through?
Yeah. Well, there was a wonderful time when I had to go. If the Queen... And if a president is made a president, then they invite presidents and queens and kings from all over the world to go to the inauguration. And Chile, there was a bad time in Chile, you may remember. You won't remember, but you may know of. In the 70s, it was a dictatorship with the guy that really killed a lot of people in a football stadium, all the rest of it. They shot their own people. And there was a great turmoil about bringing Chile back to a democracy from the violence of the army and military rule. And while I was in Leeds, think back to the student house. In my house lived a Chilean who was a refugee, and he shared the house with us. It was a student house, mad.
Yeah, here, there, and everywhere,
and all the rest of it. Here we go. Yeah, and Carlos was in the house. And eventually things calmed down in Chile, and he went back home to live in Chile. And I'd not kept in touch with him. We didn't ring on the mobile phone or anything like that. Then there's a new president, Lagos, elected in Chile in 2000. And I think it was in 2000. Mm-hmm. The first, Labour left president. And so the Queen's invited, she can't go. Tony Blair can't go. Robin Cook was the Secretary of State. He can't go. So the one who's the minister for the country has to go. So it's me. So I have to go all the way to Chile for one night and come all the way back again. Yeah, this was usual. So I get on the plane with one that the staff goes with me. And I go all the way down to Chile. And we're in this huge hall, like a church. And on one side were all the visiting dignitaries. I was actually sat next to a woman called Madeleine Albright. Have you ever heard of her?
I haven't.
She was the one who was the Secretary of State for Clinton in America.
Oh, right.
With all the dignitaries, little me with all the dignitaries and all the big way there. I'm sat at the front, and the place is packed and it's inside. I look across at the Chilean side. And then about 3 rows back is this guy with, do you know Don King haircut?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I look at him, I can't believe it. It's Carlos Corbyn.
No way.
I pointed at him and he looked at me because they lived in the Bible. I said, it's Carlos Corbyn. What are you doing here? This is like in the silence before the president walks in with his satchel. And he stands up and he said, I'm the newly appointed political secretary to the president of Chile. John Battle, what are you doing with it? So I stood up and said, I think I'm the foreign minister of the United Kingdom.
That is one of the crazy things.
That's brilliant.
It was spot on.
That's brilliant.
Yeah,
I love that.
Then we had a drink after the thing and I came back home and
As if.
yeah.
You would, yeah.
Small world.
Totally much smaller
world.
than
It is, isn't it? Yeah, that's crazy.
And you never know who you'll bump into again. And in fact, even today, I wrote a piece in a book for someone that invited me to. It's just a bit serendipity. I wrote an article in a book, and then I went to help this woman launch the book. 20, 30 years ago. And I'm working on a project at the moment for women who are seeking asylum. I'll tell you a story about it in a bit. And I've had to apply for a grant. And then I had a real rush to fill this grant form in last week to the Plato Trust, and I did it as best I could, sent it off. And then the person that sent me the note back, accepting the grant, was the person that had been with me at the book 30 years ago.
Wow.
And I thought, I know you are, Philomena, what are you doing?
What are the chances?
Exactly.
It's all about never burn bridges. That's what the lesson is there.
Absolutely. Especially going up ladders. Don't tread on people going up.
That's it, exactly.
You always come down.
Because that's it. They'll be there when you come back down. That's it. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Massive lesson. And also that's a good lesson for like in the House of Commons. I don't go back very often, but the key people to know who are the cleaners, the police who guard you, the staff. And it's the same everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Little people that people pick up the paper.
Well, they're the cogs that are keeping it running.
Absolutely.
Yeah, without them, it'd be a mess.
That's where...
That's it. No, I love that.
You mentioned your time in science and technology there a few times. And one thing that I always think about when I think about at least elections at the minute and how things are run and the campaigns that people run is, compared to when you first started as a politician, things must have changed dramatically. Yeah. We spoke to a fellow who actually created the Centre for the Analysis of Social Media in the UK previously. Yeah. And he was telling us about like the kind of battle stations, as they call them, that political groups now have on for like social media and the internet and stuff. How did you see that evolve?
It was a bit before my time. When I went in, strangely, I was into Apple Macs at the bit. Well, I worked for an organisation where I had to set up a database. So early on, I could do DBase 3 and set up address lists and stuff. That was on ordinary computers, you know. And then I went to Apple Mac technology. And when I got to Parliament, I got we're in a corridor, like a church corridor. Mm-hmm. A bit like, you know, when you've got a walk round in a church, in a monastery, you know, there's like a windows all down one side. With one desk, so there was me, there was Paul Boateng, Bernie Grant, Alice Barney and McCartney were the MPs that were there when I was there. With a desk about, if I drew the line there, and a partition and another MP. So you had this much space and piles of paper. But you had a phone for the House of Commons, but you could ring out, and you could ring it if you had an office like in Leeds, which I had an office in Armley. And then I thought, what if I connect my computer to the phone point? So I did. So I wired my computer up so that I could type a letter out, send it back to here. They type it up and send it out. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then I got a letter from the House of Commons saying, John Battle, we've noticed your phone bill is 150 times higher than everybody else's. And what's going on? I said, well, I'll leave it on all the time because I'm sending all my stuff backwards and forwards through my computer. Well, you're using a computer? Disgraceful. We haven't got far yet. It was ages behind. And I was up on front on computers and phones, even the brick one, until I became a minister. But when you're a minister, you're not allowed to use your own phone and computer for state secret reasons. If you were my assistant, a civil servant, you would do all that for me. So I had 5 years when we suddenly went on to emails, Twitter, social media that I missed out on.
course.
And then it came out, and I can hardly use it. I missed that formative time, and I've never really caught it back.
Well, there was that interview that they did with Obama, which is probably a similar thing, where he said, "Yeah, my phone." He says, "It's just a brick." He's like, "I can't do anything on my phone." He's like,
Tony Blair came out. He didn't know how to work his mobile phone when he finished as well.
Yeah, that's it.
And politics has changed because when I was there, the big debate was televised in the House of Commons, and that was a massive, massive thing because it meant that this bear garden of Prime Minister's Question Time became the dominant time. It's only half an hour, but what happened was everybody performs for that hour. And what you do is you learn to perform for it. And there was a wonderful MP called Tam Dael, who was a very honest man. And he was a Scotsman who operated on words. And, for his questions were really strong and pointed. Like Mrs. Thatcher makes a statement. Tam Dael puts his hand up, I call Tam Dael, he stands up. Why? Sat down again. What do I do? It was brilliant. But he always said to me, John, when they move the cameras in, it won't be questions and the truth that we search for. We'll perform, and you can perform on the telly, as I was mentioning before. You can be on the telly, and the people think you've worked a week. So you act on the telly to get yourself in the paper locally. If I stand up and mentioned something in Armley at Prime Minister's Question Time, I know Look North would cover it because I mentioned Armley. Do you know what I mean? So it's denatured the carry on, and also having a good row with someone attracts attention. The negatives do, don't they? And shouting on board.
Oh yeah,
it looks appalling, and it is. But in the meantime, all the work that's done in the back rooms, all day and night in the committees, never covered. You never see it.
Well, that's what a lot of the general public think. They think with the jeering and the you know what I mean? It seems quite childish almost.
It's a bear gun. It's jousting.
Yeah, who can shout the loudest?
There was a critic in America, a writer. I don't know if he's still alive. He's called P.J. O'Rourke. I don't know if you've ever come across him. And he wrote critical commentaries, a bit of a satirist, you'd call him. He was a right winger, really, but he was honest about what he said. He said politics will become all about survival and creating the image of competence from one day to the next, not the reality of competence. Just to pretend you're competent, hope you get away with it. But also your image becomes more important. So you're modelling on who you are and how you want to be seen to be, and you're focusing on that rather than are the laws and budgets suiting the people that I represent. And that's where there's been a big change.
It kind of becomes like a popularity race, doesn't it, at that point?
Well, and its performance becomes more important than principles or policies. That's what happens. And then you then just what coverage do getting more coverage in minutes is more important than what you actually say. So that people notice you're on there, whether you're smiling or sad, but it don't matter what you say. So then the truth goes out the window.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, either way.
Say what the heck you want. And it doesn't matter whether you said totally different the week before because you hope nobody reads it back, and that is where it's changed. And I think that the difficulty now is that the performance bit is amplified by social media because you can go on social media as well and sustain this image. But I used to think when I had read the phrase, I was a minister when I read P.J. O'Rourke's little piece, and somebody said to me, sustaining an image from one day to the next. I said, I think that's long-term thinking. I said, what do you mean long-term thinking? He said, well, I get up in the morning and I'm terrified I have to be on the Today programme and I'm being questioned by John Humphreys. I have to survive that without falling flat on my face. Then I get to the 1 o'clock news and see how that goes. Then I'm downhill to the 6 o'clock. Then you're on to the 9 o'clock. Then you might have news night and then you fall into bed. And if you survived all those without being tripped up, you're in business the next day. Otherwise, you're sacked. And I remember when I worked for one of my Secretary of States, the person above me, who was the minister, was Peter Mandelson. And you can imagine, you've heard of him. He was really sharp and a brilliant media operator. But he was one of the best at letting you do your own thing in a way, and providing you did it right, he didn't stand over it. Others would say, oh, that's a nice job, I'll have it. I'm on television over some issue that's a good one. Other ministers take it off you because you were too lower down, and
so you don't know what you're talking about. Let me do it, I'll do it.
I'll do that, yeah. He never did that. But what he said to me, Johnny said, it's Newsnight tonight, go on that. He said, but of course, if you get it, screw it up and says you sat by the morning. But then if you got it right, he'd ring you at 11:30 at night, so you did well there. That was good. And I found him really a good leader. Good leader, because he let you have your space and encourage you enough.
And doesn't try and lead by almost fear.
No, he didn't. He never led by fear. Everyone feared him because he was so aggressive with the media. He was a good media operator.
It's always stuff that you don't really consider.
It's in the background.
Yeah. So like as general members of the public, we only, like you say, in the performative side, that's all we end up seeing.
Well, there was once a lad. I remember, when you do for the elections, you do what's called hustings. Where each of the candidates sit at a table, and there's a hall of people. You're in a wet church hall on a Sunday night before the election. Normally, there's about 40 people, all over 60 there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I remember once, and it was in West Leeds. It was in Bramley, and I remember there was a lad in a hoodie sat in the back corner, and it was just him. And he was about 20, 30 years younger than everybody else. So they'd all ask questions about tax and planning and housing and the usual stuff, and then I thought, well, we've got one young person in the room, and and all the questions have come from all the oldies, and he sat there all through it. So I said, I know what I'm like. I said, I know that's nearly the end of the meeting. I said, but you haven't said up, but you've got a chance there. You've got 5 candidates here who might be your MP. You have to choose who to vote for. You can ask us anything. So I'll say anything you want. So you made the trouble to come and sit there.
Yeah.
What is it you want to say?
Yeah.
And he stood up and said, what did he say? Oh, I remember. I said, he stood up and said, what I say to you lot, if you want to be my MP, is I'm a human being. What are you going to do about it? And sat down.
Okay.
Exactly. How do you
respond to that?
I applauded him. I said, brilliant.
Yeah.
That's the best
That's
question
brilliant.
I've ever asked. I'll tell you why. I said, because you go to vote in the House of Commons, and that say this is the House of Commons, that's the speaker where the camera is, and the opposition Labour are in, the Conservative government are there. You go around the back to vote. That'll be the no's, and that'll be the yeses. So you come out and go around. And so you go in a door in your queue, and then you tick it like a school register. And you could be voting at that time all night. You could have 50 votes that take quarter of an hour at a time, and it could be on, say it's on housing. Or at the moment, the bill that's going through on illegal migration, there's things on children, there's things on airports, on airfields to use, and all the details there, and you vote on every bit of it. And you kind of think, and so I know a bit about migration, I've got an eye on that, you read it in the paper. There's an education bill on stats. Well, I haven't a clue about stats because I've never done education. So I might say to one of does Labour vote for this or not? Or if I vote for this, will it go in the paper that I supported it? So
Yeah. Some people going to know.
What's my reason for voting? And I turned around and said, for that, from now on, every time I get to that door, I'm going to stop and ask the question, am I voting for human beings? Or is it just for my ego, getting in the paper, or because the party line has told me to do it? And I've got that was that credit to that lad.
And then that makes you think every time you go in.
And then you're asking the question: are we dealing with real people? Is it for you, or is it for the people you represent? And I thank him for that.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's good. That.
So his question: I'm a human being. What are you going to do about it?
For him to turn up and to say that as well. That's,
brilliant.
And it wouldn't have happened unless you gave him the chance to do it. So it all plays back into itself, doesn't it? That's brilliant.
Well, it sounds like it just continued anyway. We can probably just no, it's fine. We could probably just leave this bit in. Right. Where do we want to jump into next? So something that I've wondered my whole life, and I've never had the chance to actually ask someone this who has been around this environment, is what power does the House of Lords actually have, and what can they actually do?
Yeah. They can block things and chuck it back in your face a number of times. So say we wanted to pass a law on housing. Let's take housing, a slightly less controversial one maybe, but say you wanted to sort out laws about people's rights for being evicted or something like that. Do you know what I mean? And the government said, oh, well, the landlords can have all the laws they want and everybody can be out on the a moment's notice by the word of it. And you then have the vote in the House of Commons. You're on the opposition side. You're on the government side, this side. So you would then have a vote in principle in favour of the law. And that is called the second reading. Why is it called the second reading? Because the first reading is when there's a little window called the vote office where they give you a hard copy so you can read it the night before. That's the first read. You read it privately or you share it with a friend, talk. Then you go into the House of Commons second reading, general principles, for it, against. You might say you're against it, but they win because they're the government and they've overvoted you. So they've got the numbers. You then go upstairs to a committee, and that's where most of the work is. You'll meet for weeks and months going through every line. and you'll have the same side. You're the opposition, they're the government. You'll move an amendment, they'll say no. Sometimes they say yes. Sometimes they move an amendment because they realise the bill's not as good as it was. That's where the real action is in the House of Commons. But you rarely ever see that committee work being done. And I spent most of my first 10 years in committees there. And then it goes back to the House of Commons for a third reading where everybody, because not everybody's on the committee, there'll be about 20, 30 of you on a committee, goes back so that everybody in the House has a chance to have another bite at it. So you have another vote. You say, we're still not happy, it's not amended enough, we vote no. But they vote yes because they've got the majority. It goes to the House of Lords and the same procedure follows, except that in the Lords, they don't have a majority. And the Lords have got people there who are not party political in the sense that they're cross-benchers. They're neither Labour nor Conservative. They might be experts on science. There's half a dozen bishops in there. There are people who are doctors in there, lawyers, people from the charities in there and sport. A whole host, there's 800 of them. So that you can't then corral them into saying the government versus the opposition. And you've got experts in there who don't have constituency to look at. So if I'm in the, I'm going to vote for people who've got landlords chucking them out in Wesley's, aren't there? But as a Conservative over here, he might be a landlord and own 700 houses. Do you know what I mean? And you have to watch your back. Yeah. You know what I mean? But the House Lords don't have to watch the back because they've no constituencies to go home to where people are going to come at the weekend and tell them off. So they can vote how they want. And so there's a freedom in the House of Lords to deal with the detail honestly, if you like, in a kind of disinterested way. They can say what they feel about the principle and understand. And so it's a bit more academic in a way and less emotionally excited by the politics. So the politics comes out of it a bit, really, and they deal with the issues. So they then could say, we don't agree with this bill, and they send it back, turned down. So the Commons have to do it again. And then it goes back again, and it can do that 3 times. That takes up a heck of a lot of time. So they can effectively delay legislation. And if it's gone on twice and it's all detailed, the government will usually pull it and say it's bad law. You've got top lawyers in the House of Lords, you know, people who've been judges and things. They know the law inside out. They know whether it'll work. And the key test is whether someone else, if it is a law, well, as soon as it's passed as a law, and they're threatening it already yesterday in the House of Commons when the government said for asylum seekers they were going to put them on an airfield in Lincoln. A Tory MP said, right, I'll go straight to the court and get a judicial review. Well, that'll clog them up for months. You know, so that you can't pass laws that don't work because the law will challenge them and say it's bad law. Do you know what I mean? And somebody will go to court and chase it. And that's where there's checks and balances in the system. And there's the checks and balances. You've got the Parliament, you've got the government that you call the executive that draws up the laws in the first place with the teams in the departments. And then you've got the courts that can also check it. And then there's the press, of course, which acts as another checking. So you have these complex checks and balances. And I would say the House of Lords is one of those. I would prefer it myself if there was reform of the House of Lords and it was chosen more by the people, which you could do. Not that they'd to come back to be in constituencies, but that you had key areas of life that people were there. So it reflected more the communities we live in rather than it being at the moment appointees. It's appointed by the Prime Minister basically and the Queen really. And I think we could do more to say the regions could make sure there's a better balance of people from different places and different walks of life.
Definitely, because if you get in appointed members, then it's people that have been chosen by those already in power and those that might have some form of bias, even though it shouldn't be there. There's a chance that could happen. A certain
class of people end up lords, don't they? You know,
that's it. Yeah,
very few from our class get through that.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's it. And I think that's recognised now. So I think there will be. There was a time when they were called hereditaries. You know, people from the 13th century who owned a castle, and then it went down to their son and
it's the Duchess of somewhere.
And they took a lot of them out. Tony Blair, who owned a Labour, we took a lot of them out, but not enough. Do you know what I mean? We still didn't do enough to reform the House of Lords. So you'd have what you call, if the House of Commons is the first chamber, a second check-in chamber. That's what you need. If you just had the one chamber, then it's just politics all the time. You know what I mean? And that isn't the best way once it gets heightened. I think a classic one's going to be immigration and asylum bill. That's just going to be a row.
Yeah, all the way through that, because there's going to be so many different things in there that it's going to keep getting contradicted. They're going to say, well, I don't know about that, and they'll say, well, I don't know about this.
Yeah. It'd never be resolved in the Commons properly, and then it go to courts, and then
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the Lords, it's there. There's a use for it, and it is a good way to use. I mean, I didn't get chucked out, thankfully, by the good people of West Leeds. I stepped down because I don't think you should do those jobs for too long. And I'd done 23 years, and I'd had 10 years in opposition, 13 years effectively in government.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can start rechurning ideas you had 30 years before and sticking with old ideas, and you need fresh ideas to come in. So I wanted younger people to come in. With younger ideas, it could be an older person in a way. I'm in my 70s, but it could be someone who's in the 50s or 60s with some experience, or it could be a young person in the 20s, but you need fresh blood in there and fresh ideas
definitely.
and fresh
outside
and
influence.
fresh energy, really, fresh passion in there. And so I think that it shouldn't be a job. I always said when I was elected, I didn't think I'd last more than one term. I thought I'd be thrown out. But I said in the party meeting, if I ever managed to do 20 years, no one should do more than 20 years. And I did 23, and it was the appropriate time to withdraw, really, let someone else. And that's when Rachel Reeves moved in on West Leeds in a way, and she got elected. And so I don't think it's a job you should do for life, but I do think there's such a thing as experience that could go into the House of Lords. Do you know what I mean? People have done work in lots of different areas to bring the wisdom of their experience to bear on laws
and also almost as if it's wisdom and experience, isn't it? They've lived the lives, they've been amongst the people.
And interestingly, one thing they can do, they can't block the budget. They can block all the laws, but not the budget. That's the one thing.
One thing that's just passed straight through there.
Yeah. That's the contested one all the time.
Yeah, I must admit, it ties into what you said about it becoming more of a show in politics. And I think you are very correct with, I literally had practically no idea how the House of Lords actually worked. I just knew that they could reject things, but I always thought that the government would just end up pushing it through anyway. But I'm in complete alignment with the fact that if you got in the House of Lords, for example, a medical expert or someone that had worked in the NHS for 20 years and a fire service expert.
Won medals at the Olympics. And she makes a great content. One of the Paralympians is in there, of course.
Okay. Yeah, so I think people like that can have an unbiased opinion on their profession or on their walk of life is much more valuable than... You see, I think myself included, a lot of the general public still think that maybe it's more of just rich people that are in there.
Yeah.
But if that's not the case, then that makes me quite happy.
But also, the House of Commons is a really strange place because you go in and it's like a cross between a museum and a church. Do you know what I mean? You walk in and the way people dress up in the Lords, the pictures around the walls, the way the walls are painted. You think you're in a palace, and it is called the Palace of Westminster. And at first I thought, God, how do I fit into here? And then after a while, what you feel is the weight of history, really. You think to yourself, you're only going to be, most people, I was incredibly fortunate and privileged by the people at West Leeds to be there 20 years. The average lifespan of an MP is between 10 and 12 years, and I did twice that.
Nearly did double, yeah.
You don't do a long time in there, and you're aware that you're a small part in a massive picture, that there's people in there hundreds of years before you who've had better ideas than you. Do you know what I mean? And with greater people than you and better speakers than you.
And I mean, the amount of history that's just contained with them and their walls anyway, it
seeps off the walls, really. So you're aware that you're in a special place, and I wouldn't like to say, go meet in a porter cabin up the A1 somewhere instead. You know what I mean? You need that weight on you in a way to act responsibly. And I'm not sure the present carry on has helped us act responsibly.
Well.
But I partly think that's media, really, because the fifth element of it, the way we communicate, is part of the problem. But once you're in the building, there is a sense of seriousness about it generally.
Can you imagine there's like a impending feeling on you, almost like you're being obviously not watched, but it feels like you're in like almost like you were saying, museum/church is a place where you've got to be respectful. We've got to be quiet now. This is.
I used to love taking people down though from schools and from West Leeds and showing them around.
I bet.
I remember once taking one of Joss's friends was a traveller, and his family tarred the M621, and this lad, you probably see his car parked outside. He wasn't a Porsche, but and what's it, Maserati or something?
Oh,
he used to drive up and park it, but that lad. His family lived in a caravan or Cotton Springs way, and they had loads of money, but they didn't, they used it on cars and stuff. And he was Joseph's mate, and I met in Clubland or somewhere. And he said to Joseph, your dad works in Parliament. He said, I'm really interested in the kings and queens of England. And this is a lad who couldn't read and write. And he said, do you think I could go to Parliament and look at the statues? Because in the Great Hall were the statues around the windows of the kings and queens of England, big statues of them on the plinths up there. So I remember him. I said, of course he can, bring him down. So he came down. And the Great Hall is a massive room. It's where the Queen was when they had the funeral. You remember the window and the far back, beautiful windows where there's a big, and it's that huge room with the steps going up. And it's where they have the big events when the president visits or something like that. Or the Pope came there. But usually that room is empty. There's nothing there at all, except these statues and a few benches around the side. So I'd walked in the bottom door and you're looking at the window. And above it is a massive wooden roof, and it's called a hammer beam roof. And it's the only bit of the history that I knew. That's the oldest hammer beam roof in the whole country. I'm saying, and I look around, I can't see him. He's down on his hands and knees, looking at the slabs that make up the floor. And he said, wow, who made this floor? This is a fantastic floor.
And I bet you just don't think anything
exactly.
of it.
And I'm looking at the roof. He's the expert on tarring, flooring.
That's it.
Floors.
Yeah, of course.
And there's a fantastic floor that I've never noticed. I learned my lesson. Don't look up at the sky and forget what's under your feet.
If anything, that's testament to you saying that we need people with these background experiences, because they're seeing things that nobody else is seeing.
They see it through fresh eyes and then sharpness up a bit. Yeah.
That's it. There you go. Yeah.
I did something very similar when I was in primary school, I think it was. I was actually taken by Rachel Reeves on a school trip. There was only 6 people in my school. The only reason I got selected is because my dad was a teacher there, so I think he kind of put me forward. So I ended up going down and had a walk around the House of Commons and stuff, which was, I barely remember it now because I was so young, but I remember just kind of being awestruck at this place and how important it was. And I know what you mean, the grandness of it makes you really feel like there's a lot of important decisions been made there. As soon as you walk in the building, just how large it is. It's as you said, it's like walking into the Colosseum in Rome or something, but just on a smaller scale. I know you mentioned the Queen there as well, and kind of similar to the House of Lords question actually. How much could the Queen do? Now, if the Queen wanted to say, if there was a new Prime Minister being sworn in, and not the Queen, sorry, the King now, and the King wanted to actually say, no, I don't like this person, I'm not going to let them, would they be able to do that?
They would. It cause a hell of a fuss if they did now, though, since they executed Charles I. You know what I mean? So they're a bit wary that there'd be a revolution and chop their head off. So they tend not to take you on, but they have to report every day to the Queen or every week.
Really?
Oh, yeah. There's a special person appointed by Parliament in the government whose job is to go to the palace in a car I think it was every couple of days, or certainly once a week, to have an audience with the Queen and tell her what had gone on that week. And they were never allowed to report what the conversation was about. And they would talk about personalities and things. I can't imagine it was just about what was law number 17, And
I can imagine some choice words about Boris.
Big argument about Prince Charles, now King Charles. He was always told off for interfering on climate change. Do you know what I mean? And I can't see why they can't have views. And I have to say I met him a few times with young people in his Prince's Trust, and and I was never a great quote fan of royalty, but my God, it was really good. And I've just heard the speech he's just given in Germany today, and he's slipped his own ideas in a bit, and good on him.
Yeah.
What would happen? There would be a crisis if he overruled the elected government of the day, and he probably wouldn't do it, but have a quiet word somewhere to say. And a lot of politics is, it is it's something I've often asked myself, really. Is compromise a dirty word? Do you stick to your principles and write people off with it? I'm so convinced of my principles, I'm going to kill you for them. Oh dear. You know what I mean? But all right, I'm willing to give a bit if you give a bit, and a bit like that Habibi man. You know what I mean? Can we give a bit here? And a lot of politics is about that, but there's a kind of way in which the science of the technology is binary now. It's 0 or 1. All the numbers are 0 or 1. You're for it or against it as hard as you can be. So give us a straight answer, yes or no, all the time. But loads of situations like, well, maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
There's grey areas, isn't there? There's always grey areas.
Yeah, and it's the grey areas. And can we meet in the grey areas somewhere and form human relationships and run the world so we can all live in it? And I think that's the kind of area where the constitutional monarch has a role. Do you know what I mean? To say, hey, hang on, that is, and I'm sure, I mean, some of the things he was saying about welcoming strangers in Germany, for example, was a bit strong for poor old Suella Braverman, you know what I mean? And there'll be a bit of background conversation there. And so good on him. But if he stormed into Parliament with a sword and said that, and at the same time, there is what's called the Privy Council, which are the senior ministers and opposition leaders, and you get that, and you're that for life. And I am one of those, and he can call you to ask advice at any time.
Wow.
And the Queen, it's not as glamorous as you think. Like, the only time I went, it was whether we should change the picture on the stamp. You know, I had to vote yes.
I mean, it's something.
It's always consulted.
That's it, exactly. Yeah.
But you know what I mean? They do have that, and so senior ministers will meet with the king and his advisors on policy areas. If they felt it was going, you know, the people were just being shat upon, to use a phrase, they could intervene. Yeah, but it's a negotiation.
I always just find it really interesting. In my head, I'd imagine one day the king, there'll be a prime minister that he doesn't like, and I obviously know that because it's a democracy that we live in, we wouldn't really, as a public, just accept that they were going to get rid of them as a monarchy. Yeah. But I do think that a lot of the British people would probably side with the monarchy for at least there'd be a percentage. I think probably maybe like 20-30% of the country would go, no, actually, we agree with that. Yeah. Which is it's a bit worrying to me in some ways. But
I think it's because of what I call the what's the phrase? The agonistic mess of democracy. And democracy is not easy. It's a mess. Do you know what I mean? And people, it's interesting, isn't it, with the Trumps and Johnsons to some extent, and others, I think in Bolsonaro in Brazil, people find it easier to have strong leaders. You know, tell me what to do. You know, and there's sometimes, in there, you know, if you play sport or someone, just tell me what position to be in and I'll kick him out, as you say, you know. But another time somebody leaves you to get on with it. Do you know what I mean? And it's harder to be left to get on with it. So you just tell me what to do. And there's that's in the body politic. The people have busy lives. They don't want to be involved in loads of meetings to sort out, you know, social security or tax. So we left it to you lot to do. And then they want a bigger leader to sort it out. So there's this dream, and it was there in America with Trump. Well, with all the time, is it? That there's strongman leadership is a big theme in most countries of the world. And you can see it in China and places, and Russia now with Putin and Xi in China, you know. And yet the challenge is, how can we involve more people to have a say in their own lives, you know, because a lot of people then get left out. That is the dilemma of democracy, isn't it? And people lose confidence in democracy. And I would say they see the carry on in Parliament. They think that MPs aren't telling the truth or what they should be, and now do what they should be doing, or they're just cashing in and making money and the people are getting poorer. That they will turn around and say, well, we don't want this democracy. Election carry on. It's worse than having somebody who's a good dictator. Yeah. That's the worry of it, really. And that's where even the monarchy thing, you're right. If you see somebody like the Queen, she'd have walked it, you know what I mean? Never elected, but the respect for her was sky high. Yeah. It might not have been the same for Prince Andrew.
It's no.
But you know what I mean? There is a way in which leadership, if you've got someone who's good, make them a god.
Yes.
And but there's a problem. Even if they're a good god, there's a problem about that.
Yeah, I agree.
There should be no forced deity thoughts, essentially.
How do we build the people up from the bottom up to have a share according to their own capacities and interests, really, so they feel the part of the show. They're shaping the future. So that's the challenge.
Interestingly, on your point there about obviously the Queen, she had a very large appreciation from the public. Everybody looked up to the Queen. So now that King Charles is reigning, do you feel like the public might fall out of less confidence with them?
Not because I'll tell you two stories. One was the Duke of Edinburgh. He came to West Leeds once, and I had a terrible experience with it. Well, I'll tell you two stories. When I was in Hunslet as a councillor, there was a block of flats called Leek Street Flats. Have you ever heard of them?
I haven't. I know Hunslet Grange.
Hunslet Grange. Great big blocks. There were streets in the sky, and they were terrible. And they were built with slabs that were transported in from Beverley, and they never dried out the underfloor heating. So people got electric bills then of 300 quid a quarter. So they had to leave the flats because they couldn't afford them. You know, awful conditions. And so we were campaigning to knock them down, really, you know. And at that time, I just got on the council, I think, and I was working with the tenants there, and Arthur Miller, who was from Bramley, was the chairman, the Labour chairman of the Housing Committee, and Prince Charles and Lady Di were getting married, and they couldn't agree which castle they were going to live in. So said.
Oh, imagine that.
Yeah, so Arthur Miller stands up, and he played rugby league for Bramley. A great man he was. And he was man of the people, and Mr. Bramley. Straight talking. Right then, he said, he stands up in the council chamber and said, in the meeting of the councillors, I hear this royal couple are looking for a flat. So I'd like them to make an offer because there's plenty of empty ones in Hunslet Grange in League Street. And I stood up and said, I'm at a point of order, Mr. Chairman. I object. I'm the councillor for Hunslet. I want no problem families moving into my ward. and the balloon went up. You might imagine, do not insult the royals. Evening Post. Oh, battle is on. And I had to go on Radio Leeds, and I remember on Radio Leeds, it was a phone-in programme. I'm getting slaughtered.
Oh,
and this was, how dare you insult the royals? I said, I wasn't insulting the royals, love. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, they call it Hunslet Grange. And I said, but it's a bit of a misnomer because there's absolutely no paddock facilities at all. So it won't be appropriate, would it? And she said, I never thought of that. But after that, I never, ever attacked the royals in public again until the Duke of Edinburgh came. And he came to, what's that company called? On the corner. So where the big company? In Armley. Oh, I've forgotten it now. It does electrical widgets. But anyway, he was coming, they were extending the factory. Mm-hmm. And if a royal comes into your constituency, you have to be there as a guard of honour to welcome him. He has to ask you to come in, a bit the rules, He has to ask the MP for permission to come in and you greet him. So the company had a bit of a do because it wouldn't accept trade unions and it wasn't treating the workers all that well. And I'd queried that, just put it like that. Not a great demonstrator, anything like that. So they weren't my best friends and I wasn't theirs. But because the royal was coming, they had to invite me. It was a wet Friday morning. They'd got an awning, and one of them fancy awnings where you could walk out with a red carpet. Mm-hmm. They stood me here in the rain. You're not allowed to have a coat on and an umbrella to greet the royalty. Duke of Edinburgh's car drives up and there's a line of people to shake his hand. So the Duke of Edinburgh gets out of the car. He looks at me, and the Sergeant at Arms from Yorkshire, and this is John Battle, the Member of Parliament for Leeds West. And the Duke of Edinburgh looks at me and says, having another day off, are we? I said to him, no, I call meeting you work. And at that point, balloon goes up again. I was not escorted round the store properly. I was not invited to the buffet. I was escorted off the premises. Yeah. But the idea is, but having insulted the royals, I then met Charles in the different capacities, particularly with young people when I was doing the science stuff and some of the visits I did as a minister as well. And I have to say, I saw him in the northeast of England, in Manchester, in Oldham, in the Midlands. He was brilliant. He talked and listened to young people and he didn't go in just for a photo shoot. Mm-hmm. He sat among them and he listened properly to them. And I was so impressed by his ability to listen that I could learn from him. So I thought, for all that's said about him talking to trees and flowers, well, he can do that as much as he likes if he wants, if he's going to talk to young people like he does.
That's it.
But I have become more confident that it's had to wait a long time to be the king, but I think he'll really rise to it, actually. I think we'll find he's a very, very good leader as the royal of our communities, really, of our society, our country. And that's why I kept an eye on what he'd gone to Germany to do. And I think spot on, because otherwise we're still carrying on, 2 World Cups, or was it 2 World Wars and a World Cup?
One World Cup, yeah, that was it.
Not the nicest remark.
No, not the
sisters in Germany. But I thought, the way he did it, though, and he spoke German, and I know his family background's German, but I thought, we don't need to make enemies of any more people. We've got enough going on, And so I thought, as an ambassador, what they call soft power for the country, I think he's going to do a better job than the politician.
Sounds like he's going to be a very gracious king.
And going around the world as a front for Britain, I think he's going to be brilliant.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how he does. It's strange, and I imagine it's even more strange for you, having seen the Queen for your whole life, to then see a new king in. And you mentioned that he's... I
can't think of him as king. I think of him as Prince Charles, and I think the reason is that I can't imagine meeting him now, but I have met him a few times.
Yeah.
That's the.
I could speak to him as a normal person. Do you know what I mean? I can't imagine.
Whereas now the king rocking up.
God, he's the king.
Yeah. All his regalia on and everything. Yeah.
You mentioned how well he spoke with young people, which I think is a massive thing. And the one thing that really got me into politics, and I'm not sure on your opinions on this, man, I know it divides a lot, but the first ever time that I voted was for Jeremy Corbyn. So I know that a lot of my friends particularly had literally never even thought about voting. They'd not even considered it in the slightest. And he brought a lot of young people in, and I've kind of seen that dwindle down a little bit, or at least within my close circles I have. And I wondered what your opinion is on what the government, or particularly the Labour Party, can do to bring more young people into voting and inspire people a little bit more.
I don't quite see everybody as, everybody's either a saint or a devil, you know. And I know Jeremy Corbyn well and sat next to him a lot as a close colleague, you know. And he's a man that has championed people in poor countries. When I was a foreign minister, there were lots of places that he'd taken an interest in, and we need to know the stories. And why I say that is we don't always know the stories of the backgrounds, the people that come in boats, and that's only a fraction, but all the other asylum seekers, you don't know what they've gone through. You don't know the countries, you don't know the torment and the suffering that they've gone through. And we should know more about their countries to understand where they're from and what's happened. And Jeremy Corbyn made that his life's interest, really. And he was also, he is a man that wasn't cashing it in. Do you know what I mean? He didn't do it to make money for himself and get rich. He had a passion about some principles. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was oppositionalist. He could campaign, he could give a good speech, he'd rouse people with some passion, all of which was really good. And he did that and got all the young people involved in the Labour Party and in the election. But I think that then comes the dilemma of trying to win the power and not just be oppositional. Do you know what I mean? And that's where you've got the compromise and the real problems. That's was a real issue. You know, it was someone said to me, what was it? What was the expression? It was something like another rally of opposition, and then we're all dead. Do you know what I mean? Because you don't actually win it, and you have to win some. And I kind of feel with I do think that the way that power has shifted to the elite now, and I really do believe there's an elite in Britain that's 100%. Run by background money and outside money that's not even from Britain. You know, it's not as if it's somebody in Leeds became a millionaire like Manny Cousins and bought the football club, and it's not him I'm interested in. But we've got people all over the world in shadow companies in the Bahamas and all that stuff, running our society, giving people money to become MPs in order to fix the system. Now that shuts out millions of people from deciding to shape their future on these islands. And I think Jeremy at least rallied young people to see something of that. And the catch is that has to be rekindled, I think. There's got to be some way. And not everybody is like Tony Blair was an orator without a doubt. He was a lawyer who could read a note and memorize it and then give a speech on it and dance around it. And he's had a voice that carried people with him. You know, you went into him. Despite my name, Battle, I voted against every war. So I had to go in and tell him that I was going to resign again. I resigned over what? And if you resign, you give up your job. You know, you lose it. So the Gulf War's coming up. Tony, I've come to tell you, I'm not going to vote for you tonight. I think you're wrong on the Iraq War. And at that time, most of the people in West Leeds were in favour of it. And the papers are all in favour of it. People forget that now.
Look how right you were.
All the Tories are in favour of it. And there were me, Claire Short, Robin Cook and a few others against it. You know, and you kind of think, and I went to tell him face to face. And I remember going in and thinking, the last time I went in to have an argument with him over a bit of policy, I came out convinced he was right. So is he going to convince me and talk me down again? Because I'm sure I'm right on this one. And I held out, but he had an ability to turn your head inside out. He was a very clever man. You know, he could win and out. He could persuade. He was a persuader. You know, he could sell anything. And
ice to an Eskimo.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a brilliance about that. So he stood up in Parliament. And people didn't shout and bawl at him like they do at Keir Starmer. They listened to him because he'd mock them. He could give back better than he got. And that's the problem. And so now what I think we've got now is we've had all the knockabout with Boris, and then they carry on with what's her name. And there's a kind of a way in which politics has gone, if I said managerial. Can we calm it all down and just concentrate on the numbers? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And if we get the numbers right and balance it right, it'll work out in the wash. I think there are real serious underlying problems in Britain. around a lot of issues that need to be radically rethought. So where I am now is that in Leeds and in the rest of the country, we've got an organisation called Citizens UK, which is to involve everybody. And it's to work on what I call pre-politics. Before you get to elections and choosing your party or your MPs, can we sort out what really concerns us and what we're interested in? Can we do listening campaigns in the neighbourhoods and in the groups in the neighbourhoods? And so we bring people together, and in Leeds we've brought, in the last 10 years we've been doing it, we brought everybody together and asked people in little groups of about 20 to listen to each other. And guess what the top topic was for 5 years before COVID? Was mental health for young people. Mental health, massive issue. And then we went and campaigned with the health authorities, and we got 11 million put into the health clinics around the place by focusing. And so I think engaging the people and then saying that you too could become a leader, i.e. you could stand for Parliament, you could stand for the council, as I did. But I also think, and this is blasphemy in a way, I am a member of the Labour Party and I'll vote Labour at the next election. It's like Blackpool Rock in my... But the Labour Party isn't the be-all and end-all of the world. It's not the key to the world either. And in the future, say, in 50 years' time, will my grandchildren be voting Labour or will they've reshaped the political parties entirely? Why not is my answer. Why not? Reconfigure the whole thing. Different voting system, different way of relating, running the system better. Can the system be different and better is the question. And that isn't asked enough. And I think that's why we have to get more voices in from the base upwards and younger voices. And I think I'd be quite confident, given the way younger people talk about the crisis of climate change, that's the crisis. I mean, if Africa becomes a hot desert and everybody has to move north, why are we surprised when the sound seekers come and people are looking for jobs? There was a lovely BBC programme once called The Great March, and it was on telly one late night, and I've never seen it again and never found it, and it was in the 70s. And it was about the desert blowing in Nigeria, in that middle belt of the Sahara. And so their fields and crops of rice, it was at the time, were all just covered in sand. And they said, well, where do we go if we can't get a living here? And they started walking north. And then, people like the tribes with black staffs and sheep walked towards Libya and Tunisia and took flatboats. And the last picture was the calm of the Mediterranean Sea and people like on punts. Thousands of millions were arriving in Europe. You're not going to stop us because that's where the good land is, where the green grass is.
Of course.
And so you think if climate change is going to push people north, they're already talking about Siberia that was under cold most time, frozen 3 foot down, is now going to be grassland like savannah. 20 years' time. So there's going to be a shuffling around the world of where people go.
Moving down, moving up.
So where people live and boundaries of countries, I mean, we've only had nation states for 200 years. So in the history of humanity, there's massive space for change. Given the internet and the way that technological developments are going, the next 50 years is going to be massively different from the last 10. And we can't imagine how. But what we have to do is make sure the people have a grip on the future. And it's they that decide it, not a few people with a lot of money like Elon Musk, you know what I mean? So how do we get a grip on shaping it? So the politics could be completely different. And that's why I think the work's to be done now of encouraging people to join in and to get engaged in whatever capacity they can and to be confident that they've got ideas to change it. And I would think, I would say take the Europe debate. I don't find many young people wanting to go and invade France or Germany. They want to go on holiday.
That's it.
Go out for technology reasons.
That's it, of course.
Learn a language more than what our generation did. And why not? And it should be easier to travel there. Why not?
Everything's so interconnected now. It makes no sense to put barriers up.
Exactly. So then can we imagine what would the barrierless world look like and how would we run it? And that might mean things like after the Second World War and the First World War, they did set up the UN. And that, you think of it, it's only 50 years old, the UN, but it's collapsed really because they can't agree. So nothing happens. And the UN's a waste of time now, if I'm honest. And I was a foreign minister that took part in it. And you kind of think you couldn't get what's the point of passing policies that nobody takes any notice of? We're going nowhere. And if we don't agree to do some things together, then we all go under, and that's where the challenge is really.
Yeah, I think as a young person as well, it seems like changing a lot of these larger things is a bit of an impossibility when you think about organising people. And one thing that I've recently seen as well that I wanted to touch on is the bill that I don't know if it's been passed or they're trying to pass around protests, and how it's going to change to be illegal to cause disruption effectively. But when I read that, I know it was like disruption to public transportation networks and disruption in other areas and stuff. But I thought the whole point of a protest is to cause disruption so that it gains some kind of notoriety in the media and stuff. Yeah.
Make notes of it. Yeah. It's like strikes, isn't it? As well.
Yeah.
What were strikes about?
The miners' strikes. It's that all over again.
I mean, I thought it was a bit ironic, really, that, you know, it's a bit like China and Russia under the communists stopped people demonstrating and shot them if they did. And it and when all this talk about being against communism, and then we're introducing it here by the back door, it's insane.
It's unreal.
It's the same.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
And I think you're right. I think the right to protest, but also I loved a man who once said that when we talked about the big theories that socialism, and I remember what is socialism? I said the Labour Party is a socialist party, and I went to the Labour Party conference once and said, well, I think we got the wrong words. And I want to rub the last three letters off socialism and change it, because I've been in the Labour Party, you know, 8 years, and we've never had a social. Why do we call it social? We've never had one. We're not social at all.
We're the opposite.
You know, exactly. It's antisocial.
Yeah.
So if it's not social, why do we call it so? But somebody said we need socialism with a dash of anarchy. You need the freedom for some individuals to come up and challenge the systems and not panic when they do. No, I don't mean by going around giving everybody a gun so that individuals can go mad and shoot people. You know what I mean? But, and we've always had rules about protest and speech in public. You know, if you were to stand on the town hall steps and say, F off the king, you have a good chance of getting arrested, you know, because of bad language in a public place. There's a rule. You can do it, but you know what the risk is? You might get fined. You know? And so there are always brackets around our behaviour as a society, but it should include the right to say no. And if we take that away, and that's what's going on, or the right to free speech is to actually say what you think to power. And there was like the programme of Dimble, not what's it called, Attenborough.
Yes.
The Wild Islands programmes got pulled because it was insensitive to the government. You kind of thought, we're censoring Attenborough's programmes on nature
documentary. You think,
and there's a kind of paranoia building in, you know, that anything that criticises us must be stopped. I think politicians have to remember that their most important capacity is the capacity to take criticism, let somebody tell you you're doing the wrong thing at the wrong time and take it and change. And if politicians have that capacity, get rid of them.
Yeah, I think it's a bit scary, especially with that's effectively censoring the media, not letting Attenborough's show air, and then also censoring people's ability to even show their frustrations.
Yes.
It just, to me, it seems like a bit of a scary place. But of course, with the current government that's in, that bill got through, I believe. I think it actually passed, didn't it?
Yes, it has passed.
Yeah, which is crazy to me, because I think who would vote for that?
I also think they're passing laws that are unpoliceable. They haven't police time to police it. You know.
Yeah, that's true.
If you walk down the Edrow now with 10 people and said, "Oh no, we're just a group," you know, but it's all, and your prison's full. You think you're going to clog the courts up? It'll take you 3 years to get that.
How's that? Yeah.
That's what Extinction Rebellion. I don't completely agree with all their tactics, but they've realised that, you know, it's going to take weeks and months to go.
Hours and numbers.
And in the meantime, people who are killing people and raping people can't get in the courts because they've got the wrong people in the courts. So there's a kind of logic to it all, isn't it? It gets to the point of it's just repression.
Yeah, it's more just games more than anything else.
Media games to sound tough, but also to protect their power. And their power needs to be challenged more, you know. And I think being mealy-mouthed about it, some people need to speak out more about power than they do.
Yeah, 100%. So I've got one more kind of finishing off question, and the only reason I'm finishing it off now is because I'm afraid our cameras are going to die.
Yes, I've been looking at them.
No, honestly,
fantastic.
I'm already going to say I'm 100% up for doing a part 2 at some point in the next month or two, because I have genuinely really enjoyed this. But I just thought to end this episode off at least, is there anything that you're working on at the minute in the local community? I know you've worked on Bramley Baths and stuff in the past that saved that. Yeah. Is there anything that you're working on in the local community or in general that you think people should know about or maybe look into doing themselves?
I enjoy most of them in the Baths is a great success for local businesses, and you could use the template of people coming together as volunteers to run a business, a social enterprise, and you could apply it to care working, childcare, instead of big companies doing it and ripping everybody up, do it at street corners or local communities. I do citizens in Leeds, but where I give most of my time at the moment is to New Wortley Community Centre, which is down in the corner near the prison. And it's a little bit of the community. It wasn't in my constituency. It was in Hillary Benz, but it was this side of the gyratory and near the prison. And it was a locked off enclave. And I really felt for the people there that they didn't know the councillors didn't have an MP, they were left out. And they did a bit of a community centre. And the neighbourhood has lots of challenges, of all kinds of issues, really, and a bit of a community centre there. And I helped set up a men's walking group there on a Friday, just to get men who were facing challenges themselves, left in a bit of a hole, if you like. And we have a walking group every Friday, and we share a meal every Friday morning for anybody to come, and that's built up. And I just think it's helping to rebuild that community. And on a Tuesday, we have a poetry and pizzas post-COVID. And the idea was to get people out of their houses after COVID, mainly women and children and older people as well. So, and I love poetry. And I found working with those people has kept me going. Brilliant, brilliant people. Massively, massively underestimated people in one of the most, I would say, cut off and corners of the world where people are really facing challenges and wouldn't really know where to turn, to get out of the challenges that they face. And I find that working with the people there is a liberation, really, and we need more of that. And so you need some people, to go into politics, but more people to work in the community. And I have the privilege of being free now because I'm retired, but we need to train and pay people to do it, just as I did in Kirby. You need a person, and there are young people working there. There are young people that come out of college and work with the people there. And that centre's, I've watched it over 10 years, really building up as a vibrant place. And if I tell you, we had a classical music concert of a person there whose mother at the age of 80 played the piano in the orchestra in Manchester, the top orchestra, and she came into New Wortley.
The Philharmonic.
The piano. We had a proper meal. We dressed up for it, and we had a music night, and fantastic.
That's brilliant.
We recently had a walking group down to the town centre where we had a history tour of the Corn Exchange and the Cloth Hall and the markets with someone who's an expert on history. And we're going to bring that back now to do the story of Wortley and get the people's history done. And that kind of thing at ground floor level gives people a sense of place that they can be proud of and be proud of their roots. But from their roots, blossom into challenging the society we're in. And that's where I think the action should be now.
Well, I think that's a fantastic way to end it. And I hope that does motivate people to really go out there and put a bit of effort into the local community.
Absolutely.
And John, thank you so much for joining. I'm sure we'll do this again because this has been fantastic.
The stories that have come out of this have been really entertaining. Really.
And I've actually learned a lot of answers to questions I've had for years. So thank you so much.
I've had the privilege of 30, 40 years, in a way, listening to people, probably not well enough because I talk too much. Like that old monk said, what's the point of it being in a silent monastery, talks too much. But learning to listen to the stories of the people, as I'm trying to do in New Wortley now, that's where the real roots of change will come from.
Fantastic.
Yes, we love it. Thanks, John.
Okay.